Hey everyone, and welcome to Volume 1 of Horror Stories for Bedtime. Tonight we have 10 stories. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's aim for 1,300 likes. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated, as I post content just like this all the time, and I'd love to have you here. Also, I almost never ask for this, but if you would like to share this video on your social medias, such as Facebook and Twitter, or whatever have you, just telling a friend, whatever it may be, it's always very much appreciated. And last but not least, it's been a little while since I've just said thank you for the support. We are coming up on 7 years. It'll be 7 years in April on the 20th, so just next month. It's a very long time. I've been creating content here for well over half a decade now, and I still love what I do very, very much. And it's extremely humbling seeing people still enjoy what I do. So I hope I can create content for you all for many years to come. I just hope that I always have this. This is the one thing that I don't want to change. And I'm glad that so far it hasn't. Anyway, enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. Good night, everybody. Ever since I moved overseas, my sister and I have made a habit of sending each other care packages. Of course, there's typical occasions where we send each other gifts. Birthdays, Christmas, and so on. Those gifts tend to be simpler, sometimes just plucked straight from an Amazon wish list. But the care packages we make are special. Whenever we go shopping or travel to another place, we keep an eye out for things the other would like. My sister found some amazing bath bombs at a small village fete once. The sweet floral fragrances lingering in the air seemed to me like an embrace all the way from home. Right before Lunar New Year, I found some earrings at my local night market. One shaped like a tiger mid-roar, the other a dainty red lantern. Perfect for Violet. She spammed me with 100 selfies of her wearing them to our hometown's annual dragon dance. Seeing her smile made me happy and terribly homesick all at once. Our care packages were all like this. Careful collections lovingly selected from wherever we happened to be, save for whenever one of us was having a bad few days. We always had at least a few things ready to send just in case the other needed some cheering up. When Violet's boyfriend dumped her the day after Valentine's Day, I sent her a parcel I'd been working on for weeks. My favorite local snacks, a new book by her favorite author, a small hand-painted paper umbrella from a mountain village, a box of tea leaves from a lakeside stall, and always a letter full of warm wishes. This time on the back of a postcard showing a sea turtle swimming in a coral reef. Violet gushed over everything from the scent of the tea leaves to the intricate brush strokes of the flowers painted on the paper umbrella. Being able to keep my sister cheerful across continents made the distance seem much smaller than the 14-hour flight I made every summer. But then the virus happened. Suddenly, no more parcels. I must have bothered the poor workers at the post office 100 times, but rules are rules. No mail bigger than a letter could be sent to my home country. Suddenly, all of the things I'd prepared for Violet had to be stowed away for who knows how long. Still, we sent each other letters, both taking the time to find the most beautiful or bizarre postcards we could. But it wasn't the same as our care package ritual, especially when I encountered my own series of bad luck. A cheating partner, a stingy landlord, an overbearing boss. I don't want to wallow too much, but it was a month's worth of woes within a handful of days. Could have been many months' worth, even. Violet was still there for me online, but I'd never been able to feel truly connected to anyone through a grainy video call or a couple of texts. I miss knowing that my sister's love would have appeared on my doorstep had it not been for these trying times. I hated being stuck at home with no one left to complain to. More than anything, I missed my sister. That's why I was so elated when the package arrived one morning. It happened just when lockdown rules were beginning to ease. I still hadn't been able to send anything to Violet, but when I got home, a small lilac bundle addressed in familiar cursive was waiting for me. My heart leapt. The rules back home must have been lifted, and Violet had hurried to send a gift. It was like being a child at Christmas. I couldn't wait to see what my sister had sent me. Ignoring the bills sticking out of the postbox, I almost ran back to my apartment to see what was inside. Underneath the paper was a box. Glossy black cardboard. Huh. Violet usually sent colors that reflected her own sunny personality, unless she'd ordered something specific online and kept the box. Anyway, the box wasn't a big deal. I was in such a hurry. I nicked my finger with the box cutter as I tried to carefully slit open the top. A few drops of blood sank into the cardboard as though it were made from sponges. I don't know why I remembered that so vividly, but I didn't care at the time. After bandaging my finger, I was finally able to open the box. Inside were the strangest things Violet had ever sent me. My eyes were drawn to the necklace first. It wasn't my style, nor Violet's at all. The white stone looked far too expensive for our usual care packages. A rainbow glimmer danced across its surface whenever I turned to meet the light. An opal, I assumed. Had Violet found it at a second-hand shop? Its chain looked old and dull compared to the vibrance of the stone. Maybe Violet fancied it as a charming antique. That seemed a bit more like her. But I couldn't make sense of the rest. A pouch of black velvet revealed itself to hold a number of smaller bags, each containing some kind of seeds. They were perfectly smooth, some colorful, some dark, and all unfamiliar. Alongside each one was a typed note, not Violet's style whatsoever, with just a few cryptic words. Plant to soothe a broken heart. Plant to appease another's greed. Plant to get revenge upon a cruel tyrant. And more. They seemed like things you'd see in a witch's shop. The last item was a bottle of dark liquid, labeled with that same bold typing. I was surprised she'd gotten it through customs. Drink me. Nothing else. Just like Alice in Wonderland. When I opened the bottle, I found it to be utterly scentless. It could have been black water for all I knew. Strangest of all, there wasn't a letter in sight. Violet? I said aloud as I screwed the lid back onto the bottle. This is the weirdest care package you could have come up with. There was no one in the apartment to agree with me. Well, what would you have done? I decided not to contact Violet right away. With our time zones, I'd be bothering her in the middle of the night. Instead, I decided to follow whatever witchy instructions Violet had sent me. First, the necklace. After cleaning the chain, I put it on and it was stuck by how cold it felt. Even through my t-shirt, it was like holding an ice cube to my chest. Surprisingly heavy, too. I already had pots ready to plant the seeds. My balcony gets a lot of sunlight, so I had no doubt whatsoever they would flourish in no time. Maybe that's why Violet had sent them. It'd be fun figuring out exactly what kind of plants they were. I decided to start with the first three, the broken heart, the greed, and the tyrant. As they sank into the soil, I felt a strange sensation, as though I was pouring my troubles away into the soft dirt. It was strange, but not unpleasant. When I watered the seeds, I felt droplets run lightly down the back of my neck. It was a hot day. Sweating isn't abnormal. The bottle I decided to wait and ask about. I couldn't be showing up to work drunk after all. It was a few days before I remembered I hadn't mentioned the care package to Violet at all. The knocking woke me up before dawn. I stumbled across my apartment in a daze. I worked afternoons and nights. I always sleep in. I wasn't even awake enough to question the safety of opening the door to a stranger so early in the morning. Or not bright enough. I'll let you decide. It wasn't a stranger. It was Zara, my ex-girlfriend. She staggered inside before I had a moment to snarl. Evie, what have you done? What the fuck are you doing here? Was what I came up with when I returned to my senses. Get out. Get out now, before I call the police. Evie? Was all she managed to say. I noticed wet stains down the front of her black dress. Drunk. I had never thought of Zara as a drunk, but then I'd never thought of her as a cheat either. Get out. Go back to your other girl, whatever her name is. I don't care. Just get out. Zara vomited a torrent of blood onto my floor. Time seemed to stand still. I stared at the blood, then at Zara. Her face was deathly pale as her eyes rolled back in her head. Trickles of red dripped down her chin like drops from a watering can. Oh my God. Zara, what did you do? Zara sank to the floor as though she was drowning in her own blood. She coughed, sending beads of blood everywhere. All I could do was watch. It felt like something cold and heavy was pinning me to the spot. Evie, I'm sorry. She rasped. Her fingers grasped weakly at my ankles. Evie, I'm sorry. Please stop. She broke into a fit of coughing as her grip lessened. Her teeth were pure red. I looked down at myself, splattered with the blood of my ex. One single drop rested on the necklace I'd forgotten to take off. The opal winked in the light. Finally, I broke out of my trance and scrambled for my phone. I could hear neighbors entering the corridor outside and voices began to rise. God, had she been coughing up blood all the way here? I made the phone call. Zara watched me the whole time. She no longer seemed able to speak. Instead, her dead eyes were fixed upon the opal hanging from my neck. Zara didn't make it. She'd consumed something unknown but terribly poisonous, the doctors said. They seemed baffled. I just felt numb. A tiny part of me had still cared for Zara after all. A bigger part of me was wondering if I'd be left to clean up all the blood. Guilt began to seep in. When I was finally allowed home, I found my apartment immaculate. I sent a silent thank you to whoever had mopped up all that awful blood. My clothes I threw straight into the bin. Not worth trying to wash the blood out. I took a long shower before I felt able to breathe properly again. That didn't last very long. I didn't notice until I pulled back the curtains. The first seed on my balcony had sprouted. Large leaves, all blood red, perfectly heart-shaped. Plant to soothe a broken heart. I called Violet immediately. Hey, Evie, she said drowsily. It was still early back home. How are you doing? It's been a few days. Violet, what are those seeds you sent me? What? The seeds in the care package. The ones with all the funny labels. What are you talking about? The care package. The one you sent me. What's growing from these seeds? Evie, I haven't sent you anything. I couldn't send you anything. I could hear the confusion in Violet's voice. There's no way she was joking. And why would I send you seeds? I couldn't barely speak. It was in your writing. The address, I mean. Not the rest. It had my name on it. It has to be someone else. Now Violet was starting to sound annoyed. Did you call me this early to complain about seeds? I ended the call before we could begin to fight. Violet and I never fought. The red leaves of the plants seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. Did you hear about Mr. Yen? My neighbor said as soon as I stepped foot in the elevator the next day. Oscar lived directly above my apartment. Both our homes and many more were owned by Mr. Yen, one of the wealthiest, we assumed, landlords in the area. He was the exact caricature of a stingy landlord. Well-dressed, well-fed, well-educated, and completely self-absorbed. Oscar and I often shared stories of leaking pipes left unfixed and black mold creeping in across ceilings. No, what happened? They found him in his house last night. Dead. What? I know, right? They're saying he was poisoned. Rumors are flying around about a really awful scene. Apparently his wife found him all covered in blood. Do you think he did it himself? The cold, heavy feeling was coming back again. The elevator dinged as we reached the ground floor. Evie, are you okay? You look like you're about to throw up. My voice was a mumble. I think I left something upstairs. Sorry. It took me several fumbling tries to unlock the door to my apartment. My hands were shaking madly. I hadn't watered the seeds nor the plant since Zara died. How could they have thrived? When I pulled back the curtain, a second plant had bloomed. Blood-red vines stretched out towards the sun. They resembled nothing so much as an outstretched hand. I threw away the plants. It didn't change anything. I heard the gurgling sound from my boss's office that same day. I didn't rush along with my coworkers to see what was happening, but I heard their screams and cries. I just kept typing at my desk. None of the words I typed seemed to make any sense. None of the calls for an ambulance were going to help. Nothing, right then, seemed to matter at all. I took off the necklace, too. I was going to throw it away, but what if some other unlucky soul finds it and thinks it's treasure? It's in that awful black box at the bottom of my wardrobe along with that bottle of dark liquid. I can't bear to think about it. The plants, the necklace, the bottle. Drink me. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I did. Violet called me today, our almost fight all forgotten. I could hear the sing-song happiness in her voice. Evie, thanks ever so much for the care package. It's a bit weird though. Where did you get these plants? I froze. What care package? The one you sent me. Violet thrilled. I could hear our parents talking in the background. Our mother was complimenting the perfect heart-shaped leaves of the plant. Violet, I didn't send you anything. The rules haven't changed yet. And the ring. It's stunning. She said, not hearing a word I'd just spoken. It's so cold and heavy. Did you pick it up at one of the night markets? It looks real, though. I didn't send you anything. What? I heard the sound of something heavy being put down on a table. But it just arrived this morning. The address was written by you. I'd know that awful handwriting anywhere. Violet? I was trembling so much it felt hard to breathe. You need to throw that away. The plants, the ring, even the box. Throw it away. What about the wine? We already drank it. What? It's wine, right? We all tried some. None of us could figure out what it was. It didn't smell or taste like anything. Evie, what do you mean you didn't send it? The phone fell from my numb fingers. I don't know what to say to my sister. Whatever was in that bottle, is it going to poison my family? The same way Zara and the others died? Violet didn't sound sick when we ended the call. She only sounded confused. No vomiting up blood, no awful coughing. I have no idea what's going on except I didn't send that care package to Violet. And she never sent that one to me. That means there's someone, something out there who knows. What's going on? Why did they send these things? How do you even know our names? Most importantly, what's going to happen to my family? We hear it every night at 12:01. The sound of a helicopter is heard circling around every house on our street for 1 hour. This has been happening for 3 years straight. No one has ever seen it, as we are too scared to look. At 12:01, we immediately hear it. But since we live in the middle of Cedar Road, towards the end, the sound is far away. That gives our dad a chance to place the sheets of metal he got from work in the windows. He brought them home the day after this started happening. He came home and had me help him bring these pieces of metal in, cut up to fit the window perfectly, because we live near the end of the street. It also gives us a chance to get back and hide somewhere. We aren't quite sure why we hide, because we still don't truly know if this thing is a threat to us. I was 12 the first time this happened. My brother was 10 and my sister was 7. It was a Friday night, and at first we thought it was just any old helicopter you'd hear. We all always had a fascination with planes or helicopters, and we would always look and watch them fly by. So the first time we heard it, we all ran to the window to see it. It was muffled, indicating it was still at the other end of the street, but we still should have been able to see it. But something weird happened when we did. The first thing we noticed is we didn't see it. There were no lights or anything. Another thing that I thought was weird was when we looked out the window, we heard no sound. And not just no sound from the helicopter, but no sound at all. No crickets or any other nighttime sounds. It was just dead air. But when we backed away from the window, we could hear it again. My dad noticed it too, and that's why we never try to look at it anymore. We all find it very strange. It stops all of us from sleeping early. We are too scared to go to sleep early. Something just keeps us awake to hear the helicopter. Because of this, everyone's bedtime is 1 a.m. Not that my parents are happy about it. They have tried to tell us to go to bed early, but once it gets later in the day, the thought of sleep leaves our mind and we have to stay awake. I don't know if it's a hypnosis, fascination, or obsession. It circles around every house twice before moving on to the next one. We know this because our neighbors all hear the same thing we hear. For us, it starts muffled, but it gradually gets louder and louder until it reaches our house. We know it's at our house because it's at its max sound and the house will begin to vibrate. We know when it moves on because the vibration will stop. All of our neighbors tell a similar story. Of course, except for the Worthingtons, the Wallaces, and the Doyles, who are the first few houses on the street. They hear it loud immediately at first, then it gets muffled. We had a standard procedure and it worked. I'm now 15, my brother is 13, and my sister is 10. When the clock hits 11:30, my sister Jessie runs over to me, and she stays with me until the helicopter goes away. She and I have always been close, so she feels safe when she's with me. We kind of became desensitized to the whole thing. Sure, we still have a slight uneasiness due to the ambiguity of the situation, but it doesn't get our anxiety up anymore. It's just like a daily routine now. It's always the same sequence. Help Dad put up the sheets of metal, shut off all the lights, make sure the doors are locked, get to our safe spot, and wait until 1 a.m. We did this for 3 years and everything was fine. Until one night, when the routine was interrupted. The day was going as normal. We all got up and went to school. Because my high school let out earlier than Jesse and Blake's, I would walk to their school and get them, and we would all walk home. We would stop to talk to the neighbors, as we all knew each other. We hadn't seen the Wallaces, though, because they were out of town. My friend Alex came out of his house and ran up to the fence as we walked by. "What's going on?" Alex asked. Alex and I have been friends since we were in first grade. "Nothing special. Same old stuff. Why?" I asked. "Can I sleep over? I mean, it's Friday," he asked. "Why not? Let's go." Alex went back into his house to get his things. He came back out with his little sister Missy. Missy and Jessie were best friends. We got home and I asked my parents if Alex and Missy could stay the night. My parents always said yes as they loved Alex and Missy, and my parents' closest friends are Alex and Missy's parents. Nothing changed. It's not like they never heard the helicopter before. They live 6 houses down from us. They have a similar routine to us, and they knew our routine by heart, so nothing felt different. The girls ran to Jessie's room. Blake grabbed something from the fridge and sat in the living room while Alex and I went to the basement as we had a better game room down there. A few hours later, I went upstairs to grab us some food and drinks and noticed that the sun was going down. I looked at the clock. 8:10. I went back downstairs to Alex. 3 hours and 51 minutes left. I said. "Until the fun starts," Alex said with a chuckle. "Yeah, we can call it that," I said back. We kept playing games until we heard the basement door open. Jessie and Missy came running down. Jessie sat down next to me while Missy sat next to Alex. 11:30 already?" I said. "Yep," she said with a simple head nod. Alex and I kept playing PS4 and I kept my eye on the clock. Once it hit 11:55, I got up to turn the PS4 off, and I jammed the sheets of metal in place of the windows. I heard the basement door open again. "You kids should come upstairs," I heard my dad say. "Already on it," I replied. We all walked upstairs. I shut the basement light off and shut the door behind me. We did a sweep of the house, shutting all the lights off and locking all the windows. We started upstairs and moved our way down. The basement windows were already covered and I shut the light off already. I was right in the middle of asking my dad where the metal was for the living room and kitchen windows when we heard it, the distant sound of the helicopter. We quickly put the sheets of metal up against the windows and shut the lights off. Jessie ran over and grabbed my hand. We all walked over to our little safe space under the stairs. At first, everything seemed normal. The helicopter got a little louder at each house. I figured I would just sit back and relax for the next hour or so. It would take 30 minutes before it even reached our house. We sat and talked for a while with Jessie right next to me. Almost 25 minutes later, we heard the helicopter getting louder. But over the sound of the helicopter, we thought we heard it. A man yelling, like screaming. We had never heard anyone yell in the neighborhood normally, let alone now when the helicopter was out. My dad wanted to see what was wrong. "Are you stupid?" I said. "Yeah, Dad, I don't think that's a good idea," Blake said. "I just want to see who that could be," my dad said. I couldn't just let him go alone, so I got up too. "No, don't go," Jessie said. "Jessie, just stay here. Don't move. I'm just going to see what Dad is doing," I said. I walked out to see my dad slowly making his way to the window. I walked up behind him, and he pointed over towards the other side of the metal sheet. We grabbed it. "Are you sure about this?" I questioned. "Just a quick second," my dad said. I hesitated, but we pulled the sheet of metal off. We saw a man. He was standing there with his head tilted, waving. We stood there confused. We were putting the sheet of metal back in the window when all of a sudden a spotlight appeared on the man and we heard the helicopter. The house also began to vibrate, but what scared us the most was that the spotlight revealed that the man was Mr. Wallace. His eyes had blood running from them and he was smiling. "Joseph?" My dad yelled. "Dad!" I yelled. He couldn't move. I grabbed the sheet of metal and put it back up against the window. I looked at my dad. "Why could we still hear the helicopter? We were looking out the window," I said. "Because this time it had something to show us," he replied. "I thought they were out of town," I said. "I thought they were too because I haven't seen them in days." My dad said, "What the hell is wrong with him?" I asked. We could still hear the helicopter and Joseph started screaming again. We started to hear the helicopter get even louder than before. "It's landing," I said. My dad and I took a step back and then we heard a clicking noise. It was hard to describe. Not clicking like you'd hear from your heater or something. It was like the sound people make with their tongue, only it was louder and more rapid. We had started to hear another noise that I soon figured out what it was. "Dad, someone is climbing up the side of the house," I said. We then started hearing glass break every few seconds. "Something is breaking our windows," my dad said. We ran to the closet and told everyone to stay inside and not make a noise, and we locked in. My dad and I then ran to the basement thinking maybe we could sneak a peek at the helicopter. Then we moved the sheet of metal. We saw nothing. We looked at each other with confusion. As soon as we put the sheet of metal back in the window, we heard it again. We then heard something hit our walkway. It sounded like a metal fragment hitting the ground, and that's when we realized that something had just ripped off of the sheet of metal out of one of our windows. "Someone is in our house," my dad said. We walked our way upstairs with a flashlight and some metal pipes we found. As we were heading towards the closet, we saw something come down the stairs. It was a very skinny and lanky creature. It was as wide as the staircase and very tall, but as it hit the bottom of the stairs, it all of a sudden changed back into Joseph Wallace. We quickly ducked back behind the wall and went inside a little storage closet. We sat there for what felt like 10 minutes until it was only 30 seconds when something came slowly walking around the wall and over to the closet. It slowly walked over, taking a step every 3 seconds or so. Its steps sounded heavy, like there was a cinder block tied to its foot. It stopped right in front of the closet and just stood there. We saw saliva dripping from its mouth and listened to its heavy breathing. It finally turned and walked away. We figured it was gone, so we exited the closet and tried to get back up the stairs. One thing we noticed is the front door was open, so whatever this thing was, it could unlock and open doors. We also saw the spotlight of the helicopter shining in. We all of a sudden heard a loud, inhuman shriek. Think of the alien sound you would hear on a video game when it spots you, similar to the sound the bugs make on Resident Evil 4. We quickly but quietly got back into the spot under the stairs. The creature came running back into the house, knocking everything over. It was throwing a fit, but we just stayed quiet. I held Jesse tight and we listened to this thing trash our house. On top of hearing the helicopter, it finally walked right up by the door to the stairs and stopped. I could hear its muffled breathing. The floor made a creak and we all looked at each other with fear, as whatever this thing was did what I hoped it wouldn't. It started banging at the door. Luckily for us, everyone stayed quiet and no one screamed. This thing just kept banging on the door. The door wouldn't be able to take much more. I then had an idea. My radio up in my room was always on, so I grabbed my phone and turned on my Bluetooth. It connected to my phone, and I turned up the volume to max on my phone and played music. We heard it from downstairs. The banging stopped and the creature ran upstairs. I took this opportunity to run out and try to get this thing out of our house. I ran to the stairs and turned the music off. I started yelling and banging on the wall. It slowly walked into my view, and it was Joseph again, smiling and waving. I ran, and then I heard the creature's shriek again. I ran and hid behind the front door, hoping that it thought I ran outside. It did, and it ran outside too. I shut and locked the door and started backing up, thinking it was over when all of a sudden I heard a loud crash. The thing crashed through the sheet of metal on one of the windows in the living room. I fell to the ground. I tried to look outside, but all I saw was a bright spotlight. I couldn't see the helicopter. The creature slowly walked up to me and leaned over right in my face. It took a breath and started to shriek again, but then I heard a loud alarm, almost like a loud fire alarm. The creature looked back and jumped out the window. I looked at my phone. 1 a.m. I got up and put the sheet of metal back up against the window as my dad came rushing out. We heard the helicopter go away, but it wasn't like it usually was. It didn't gradually get quieter. It just sounded like it quickly flew away. I leaned up against the wall and slid down to sit. Everyone else came out and ran over to me, and I told them what happened. We grabbed the sheet of metal from outside and replaced it on the window upstairs. It was in Jessie's room, so she slept in my room. The next morning we all woke up and we were having breakfast. My dad came home and called me over. We went outside and talked. We tried to figure out what happened. What we came up with was Joseph must have decided that he was going to try and look at the helicopter. When he realized that everything got quiet and he couldn't see it, he must have gone outside and looked up. And maybe that's what triggered it. Whatever he saw turned him into some kind of shape-shifting being. The screaming was a trick to get us to look outside so that Joseph could come and get us. We also theorized that whenever he suspected we would see him, he shifted into Joseph. But whenever he was alerted and chasing us or searching for us, he was the creature. That night we got ready for our routine, but we didn't hear the helicopter. The same thing with the next night and the night after that. Alex wasn't hearing it either. Neither was any of the other neighbors. 2 weeks went by and we still weren't hearing it. We got the windows repaired and we could now finally go to sleep at a normal time. I theorized that the helicopter didn't finish its cycle down the street because it stopped at our house. That's why that alarm went off at 1. The helicopter was still on the street and it just flew away, never finishing the cycle. After a year, the helicopter has never returned and the neighborhood has returned to normal. I just hope that thing never comes back to finish this cycle. I know that this might sound crazy. Heck, I experienced it firsthand, and I can barely understand it myself. But I can't stand by and do nothing. I can't tell you the name of this place, or even the city it took place in, because I'm afraid they will find out who leaked this information. I don't even know if that place was the only one where this happened, but I beg you, don't take your children to any of those places. I used to work in a pizzeria with a huge playground for children for their birthday parties. This one was huge and famous for having everything. A ball playpen, a spooky obstacle course with hanging punching bags, painted with glowing skeletons and spiders, an obstacle course with a smoke machine, 5 slides of different shapes and lengths, and the subject of my confession, the inflatable castle. To call this an inflatable castle would be wrong, but I don't really have any other way to describe this thing. It was a cross between a slide and an obstacle course full of punching bags the size of adults, so children could run through or just punch them until they calmed down after their sugar overdose. It was simple but effective, with light green colors covering its surface, along with blue lines for the inflatable tubes forming the sign. Children loved this thing, and looking back, I think it was because it attracted them. I was a newbie in this place. Originally, I was simply tasked with taking care of the front desk, greeting the customers and calling the cleaning ladies to any section of the playground that needed cleaning after the children got too excited from eating too many slices of cake in a row before running everywhere and throwing up everywhere. That was supposed to be my only responsibility, but the asshole I had as my manager, we'll call him Dick, always forced me to do all the degrading and menial tasks he could think of because I refused to kiss his ass like everyone else. Taking out the trash, dealing with complaints from parents about how their little angels asked for a chocolate cake but got strawberry flavor instead, or being yelled at by a parent because we didn't take refunds on a toy. A 15 puzzle with a drawing of our mascot that costed $9. Because it had already been used. I had to keep a poker face as this angry, overgrown potato threw it against the ground and stomped it so hard I thought he would bring down the entire building down with his weight. You know, the usual. This happened during one of my afternoon shifts. I was standing at the front desk, lost in my own thoughts and staring at the giant clock hanging on top of the entrance as it ticked down to the end of my shift. The mascot plastered on it mocked me with his dumb, goofy smile as his arms acting like the clock hands barely moved at all, dragging on my eternal agony. The place had been closed for today after our latest guests left, a single family having a birthday party in one of the rooms. The kids were running everywhere as their parents ignored them by getting wasted on the bar. Dick walked down to the front desk, turning the corner with his smug expression that could only mean one thing. He was going to give me more shitty tasks to torture me. I kept my poker face the best as I could as he told me that our boss told him we would have to check on the safety of the inflatable castle. Of course, what he meant is that I would have to do this shit while he banged one of the female coworkers in the locker room. I waited for him to leave before silently calling a shit-faced bastard and headed for the castle. To enter this section, you had to go through the entire playground. We didn't have a back door or a shortcut because whoever built this place was an idiot. Entering through the ball pen and crossing through the dark tunnels with the glowing skeletons, snakes, and spiders. I was scared of this section because of my arachnophobia, and I had to rely on a flashlight because this tunnel didn't have any lighting, probably because it was cheaper, as they always wanted to keep this section in the dark. This was the fastest route, as the other way to reach the castle would have been to climb in the upper tunnels, go through the obstacle course, and take a spiral side down into a second ball pen before entering again to bypass the scary tunnel. Did I mention that the architect was an idiot? I didn't want to risk being stuck in the slide, as that thing was made for children, so my only option was to face my fears as best as I could. The castle was built with different sections of inflatable parts to make the walls, the floor, and the slide. I don't remember how it worked, and I didn't care enough to ask, since my only true purpose there was to make sure there weren't any holes, air leaks, or lost items like toys or shoes. One time we even found an iPhone stuck between the folds of the walls, but nobody reported it as missing, so Dick took it to the lost and found box. To this day, I'm sure he pawned it online. This thing was like moving through quicksand, barely able to stand my weight because they only used enough pressure to keep children afloat. The most annoying part was cleaning up the plastic balls that always ended up here, as they would be stuck between the folds or be pushed through the safety nets of the castle's windows until they snapped the strings, forcing us to cover everything with a plastic tarp until they fixed it. I made sure to look for any issues, but the entire thing was fine. I found some socks, a toddler's shoe, and a bunch of balls scattered everywhere, but nothing out of the ordinary. That is, until I found a hole in the rift between the wall and the ground. It wasn't a puncture as the air wasn't leaking out, but it looked like one of the anchorage points had gotten loose. I made sure to press and touch the area around it, but it refused to budge or change shape at all. It was a small hole about the size of my hand, which meant any kid could get their foot stuck inside and get hurt. Or worse, stick their head inside and suffocate. I didn't want to deal with that scenario, so I put my hand inside to try and reach for anything to hold on, but I couldn't find it. I was lying on the ground, my entire arm reaching down into the hole, but no matter where I touched, I couldn't feel anything. No plastic texture, no concrete walls, nothing. That's when I realized something wasn't right, and I took my arm out. This hole looked strange. Too perfect. I don't know how else to describe it. I tried to shine my flashlight onto it to see the bottom, but the only thing staring back at me was pitch black darkness. I stared down, confused, when it accidentally slipped from my fingers and fell through the hole. The light quickly vanished without a trace or even a sound, even though it should have hit the wall or the floor. The hole seemed to react to this, as it widened open a few inches before shrinking down back to its original size. A sudden sense of dread invaded me as I realized something was wrong. I didn't dare to look inside, fearing that something would appear and drag me down too, so I tried something, holding one of the plastic balls in my hand. I made it roll towards the hole and watched as it widened just enough to make it roll inside before going back to its original shape. I threw a couple of balls again, and it repeated the same pattern as before, growing and shrinking all the same. This isn't a hole, a part of my mind told me. It's a mouth, and it's hungry. I didn't want to believe that, but it was hard to ignore what I was witnessing, especially after I already inspected its insides. I slowly walked away, trying to avoid disturbing whatever it was, but at this point, it didn't really make a difference. I had entered its territory, messed with it, and threw things into their maw. They probably knew about my presence, but didn't care at all. Why was that? I didn't want to think too much about it, so as soon as I reached the exit, I jolted out of the playground. By the time I realized what I was doing, I was sitting on the ground and covered in sweat. I couldn't believe it. I refused, but I couldn't shake it off. I tried to convince myself that I simply imagined things, that I was too tired and half asleep, so I simply imagined this thing. Just in case, I told Dick that I found a possible hazard on the castle. If he could see it too, then it would mean it really existed, right? If it wasn't there, that would mean it never happened. He asked me about the problem, so I told him it was a hole in the castle, between the wall and the floor, and his attitude changed. His grin quickly shifted into a frown, telling me that I could go home for the day. I was surprised, and when I tried to ask if something was wrong, he simply yelled at me to get out of his face and leave already. I was afraid. I didn't know what I had gotten myself into, so I went straight for the locker room to change back into my clothes and headed to the exit. I passed in front of the inflatable castle one last time, as the locker room was in the same hallway overlooking it. I tried not to look back as I left, but my curiosity got the best of me. I didn't want to turn around. My brain was yelling at me to get out already, but I didn't listen. From the corner of my eye, I saw what looked like children staring at me from inside the castle. They weren't moving, jumping, or even making any noise at all. They were pressed against the windows, their eyes peering through the safety net as I continued to walk away. I tried to act as if I didn't see them, but a part of me knew that they noticed. Even though I barely caught a glance at these kids, I realized that something was very wrong with them. None of them had any color. They all looked like they had been thrown in a vat of bleach until all the colors had been extinguished and turned into marble statues. I kept walking, trying to act as if I hadn't experienced anything out of the ordinary, with my heart threatening to jump out of my chest as I tried to erase these events from my mind. It was useless, and I know this. They've been scarred forever in my mind, and I can sometimes see their emotionless stares when I close my eyes. Nothing has happened since that day, at least to me. I could barely sleep at all that night. And when I finally managed to close my eyes for more than a few seconds, I was awoken by a phone call from my boss saying I was fired because of bad conduct or some bullshit. I don't remember what they said, but I received a message telling me that I was fired and banned from the premises, and same goes for any other location of their franchise. Apparently I had tarnished the goodwill of the company with my insubordination and unpleasant attitude, which I can assure you is a complete and utter lie. I tried to contact them, but my phone number had been blocked by the company, and any emails I sent to them were answered with the same excuse. Unable to shake off the feeling that I had stumbled across something I shouldn't have, I looked up any info about the company online, but I didn't find anything unusual. Articles, videos, newspapers. Nothing came up at all, and that worried me. There was no way this business could be so perfect. There had to be something bad about them, like an accident or some unlawful practice, or maybe some mentions about the same things I had witnessed, but I couldn't find anything. Exasperated, I gave up on my quest and tried to leave everything behind me, move on with my life and all that stuff. That is, until one day when I received a letter in my mailbox. It looked suspicious at first glance, with no stamps or addresses at all. All it had was my name on the cover written with a red marker. Whoever left this wanted me to find the truth, so I took it inside and ripped it open, pouring its contents on my desk. A dozen of papers fell down, ranging from printed documents to photocopies of what I presumed were the original newspaper clippings. All of them were related to my workplace, with most of their info censored. Names, photographs, dates. The person behind this only left me breadcrumbs to investigate for myself, probably to test how badly I wanted to know the truth. All the reports and clippings talked about accidents and disappearances that happened at the pizzeria, all of them involving customers or children. Children vanishing without a trace as they played, complaints about children sneaking in the playground at night, strange noises coming from inside the castle, workers being fired for all kinds of reasons. In a single year, they had gone through 20 replacements, most of them having been fired for the same reason I was. And the missing children. Jesus. There were photos of kids ranging from 3 to 12 that had gone missing inside or around the location. There were reports all over the country, with a list of names listed under every pizzeria. One page was full of mugshots of these children, and among them were the same ones I had seen watching over me inside the castle. Didn't make sense. Most of them had been missing for years, even in other cities, but I knew it was them. I could remember their faces, their hairstyles, their clothes, everything. They hadn't aged a single day since they went missing. Worried about what might happen, I kept these documents with me. I dumped them inside a trash can and set them on fire, including the envelope they came with. I stared into the fire until all that remained were ashes, trying to make sure there wasn't any trace left of them. I know I'm a coward, but I can't do anything about this. Covering these incidents, taking so many measures to hide the truth and what I experienced. I can't deal with this. I'm sorry. I wish I had the courage to post any info that might help to expose the truth, but I can't. The only thing I can do is to beg you, please don't go to these places. Don't work for them, and most of all, Don't bring your children to any parties. It doesn't matter if they hate you for it, or if they don't understand why you're doing this. It's the only way to keep them safe. For privacy, I'm going to call myself Rex and my grandparents Granny and Grandpa. My grandparents live on a farm in Australia. I would stay with them a lot as a kid because my dad left when I was young and my mom is an alcoholic. My grandparents were weird. First, my grandparents had a set of rules. Rule 1. Every door and window, including the doors inside the house, must be locked by midnight. Rule 2. No one can go into the forest. Rule 3. The fireplace must never be used after dark. Rule 4. If you hear screams, ignore them. Rule 5. No music can be played outside. These rules were told to all the visitors they got, and breaking any rule would make you banned from visiting them. They were very religious too. A cross on every wall, and they would pray 5 times every hour. The first event that was really strange happened during a sleepover at their house in the middle of winter. I was 9 years old and never questioned the odd rules. I just figured they knew best or something. I was playing in the backyard with their dogs when I heard a scream. It sounded like a girl. I knew the rules. Must ignore it. But it got louder and louder. I went inside and told Grandpa, "Oh, just ignore it, son. It is nothing to worry about." I played inside for the rest of the day. That night, I went to bed and the doors were locked, but I needed to pee. I knew I couldn't wait till the morning. In desperation, I unlocked the window and went outside to pee in the bushes. When I was out there, I heard the screams again, but it was closer. I heard it again. It was right behind me. I turned around and saw a girl in a white dress. She screamed again and I ran to the window and climbed back inside, locking the window. I didn't tell my grandparents. 2 years go by and no weird things happen during sleepovers at my grandparents' house. But I felt more rebellious against my grandparents' rules. I went to my grandparents' farm to stay for a week. One night, I decided I didn't like being locked up, so I decided to climb out the window and go into the woods. I took a torch with me and walked for a while, and I found a small pond. I heard a scream behind me and I turned to see the same girl I saw 2 years ago. She screamed again. I did nothing. She screamed again. "Stop it," I yelled. She stopped and ran at me, pushing me into the pond. She then started to laugh. I got out of the water and looked at her nervously. She smiled and said, "Hello, my name is Lucy." "Hello, I'm Rex," I replied nervously. She walked off into the forest and I went back to my grandparents' home confused. I decided to sneak out again the next night. I walked into the forest and I saw Lucy sitting under a tree. She looked at me and called me over. "Follow me," she said with a smile. We walked and talked for hours. We walked to an abandoned house. We went inside. I woke up in my bed at my grandparents' house. I was confused because I didn't remember coming back to their house. I didn't sneak out at all after that for years. When I was 16, I was in bed at my grandparents' house and remembered Lucy. I was confused since I never really knew who she was. I decided to sneak out the window and I walked to the abandoned house. I walked inside and I looked around and walked into a kitchen. I noticed the fridge was open and something was looking in it. "Lucy?" I said. It stopped and looked up. It was not Lucy. It was big, and it was like a reptile but humanoid. It walked up to me and I ran to the door. I walked into something. "Lucy," I said in surprise. It was her, but she hadn't aged at all. She smiled and took me back inside. "We missed you, Rex," she said with a chuckle. The lizard person smiled and looked me in the eye. I started to remember the first time I was here. I knew what was about to happen. Lucy grabbed a knife and handed it to me. She grabbed another knife and stabbed herself, screaming loudly. She started to shake and she grew into a large lizard with horns. I thought for a moment, Lucy. Lucifer. I ran outside. I could hear them behind me. I got back to my grandparents' house and I got into the window and closed it. I told my grandparents what happened and they explained that the abandoned house was used by some demonic cult. They successfully summoned the devil. The devil has no real power, so the cult disbanded. They then said I had a sister, but she died before I was born. My father left because of her death and my mom became an alcoholic to deal with it. She was murdered by the cult in the ritual they used to summon the devil. They then told me I was never allowed to visit them again for breaking the rules, but I was okay with that. I haven't visited them since. I have seen them at family get-togethers, but we don't speak about it. It was the first time in almost 10 years I had even set eyes on my hometown, let alone my childhood home. Smaller than we remember, huh? My brother Archer said to me as we pulled into our driveway. "This whole town is smaller than I remember." I responded with a small laugh as we parked and exited the truck. The nostalgia almost made me forget the reason we were there. "Start with their room and get it over with," my brother said somberly. It took me a moment to respond as I sat there staring over our old living room, the sight of each picture frame being a gut shot from Tyson. "Keegan?" Archer said, snapping me out of my daze. I looked at him with a simple nod, and with that we went to our parents' bedroom, clearing out all their belongings and dividing them between the two of us as promised. We tried to lighten the mood talking about funny memories, but most of the time it just led to us missing them more. We then moved on to our respective bedrooms. It was one of the few enjoyable moments as it mostly consisted of reminiscing on my old things and enjoyments. I'm gonna be real, I went full 8-year-old and played with all my little knickknacks. You'd be surprised how much you'd want to play with your toys after not seeing them in nearly a decade. Seriously, the Lego Star Wars playsets kicked absolute ass. After about nearly 3 hours of recreating the entirety of the Star Wars prequels, it was back to the depressing setting. Me and my brother had met back in the living room, so that too much may be cleared out. I never thought I'd hate the feeling of being in my own home. It made me nauseous. It felt like my heart was physically snapping with each photo and sentimental item I was forced to look at. The hatred of my home would only grow from there. As I went to move my dad's old 1940s TV when color was still considering groundbreaking, I noticed something that made me feel rather uneased. I picked it up, doing so caused my thumbs to press up against a warm screen glass. I only pondered it for a second before Archer once again broke me from my train of thought. "You take the attic, I take the basement," he asked as he filled yet another box. "Yeah, sure," I said as I boxed the television. I thought about it for a little, but chalked it up to Archer watching a classic childhood movie. I was in my room for a pretty long time. With that, I left it there and made my way to the attic, pulling down the old rickety ladder, and the moment I poked my head in, I was hit with the most disgusting scent I've ever smelt. Almost so bad I puked the second it hit my nose. After half a bottle's worth of Febreze, I was ready to climb up and finish my job. After a few minutes of literally cleaning house, the smell returned. Assuming I was getting close to the source of it, I figured I'd try to find it and fix it with the second half of that bottle. And sure enough, I found it. 3 dead squirrels. 2 being bitten in half. My first thought was, oh, fuck, that's disgusting. Then turned to, what did this? I didn't take much time to think about it at first, prioritizing not wanting to smell the rodent corpses. I quickly finished collecting the boxes and bags before leaving the attic, folding up the ladder and closing the door. I then began pondering about the cause of the squirrel crime scene I stumbled across. To be honest, I was a little unnerved about it, but I reasoned with myself, it must have been a bobcat, or possibly a snake. I mean, our town was basically on a mountain. We have had plenty of encounters with smaller predators. Oh, how wrong I was. My brother and I once again met in the living room, and my sense of unease was drastically increased as we did so. Did you want to hear some crazy shit? Archer asked me. I nodded and he proceeded to tell me about open cans of food and wine bottles. I began questioning the squirrels again. There's definitely no way a bobcat could use a corkscrew or can opener. I told him about said squirrel and he agreed it was weird, but convinced me the two situations were unrelated. It was probably a bobcat in the attic, and Mom and Dad probably just started using the basement, he said. This definitely put me more at ease, but still suspicious, because my parents never ever ate or drank down there. They'd always bring it back up, but it was the most logical explanation at the time. After clearing the house of all the belongings and loading them into the pickup, it was already sundown, so we decided we'd spend the night at home, as our apartment was an almost 2-hour drive. After a dinner of whatever leftovers we had from our lunch, we picked up on our way here, and a long period of just talking about memories. We prepared to head to bed. As I laid in my old bed, I was awoken by a loud scratching from above, along with the sound of a slight pitter-patter, like small footsteps. I looked at the clock, which read 2 a.m. Still assuming it was just a regular bobcat in the attic, I simply groaned and tried going back to bed, but the noise kept continuing. Deciding I wasn't going to get any sleep till I caught the thing, I got out of bed, grabbed a flashlight and my old man's pellet gun, and made my way to the attic door once more. I climbed up and began scanning the area, till I began to hear the little footsteps and scratches once more. I followed the sound, readying my pistol as I got close to the sound. I continued till it was practically right next to me before turning my flashlight and catching the creature that had been the cause of all the strange occurrences we've come across. Damn sure wasn't no bobcat. My hand began to tremble slightly as I looked at this creature. It was humanoid and about 3 feet. Closer to 4, actually, as the thing stood in a hunched-over crouch. Its feet were extremely disproportionate to the rest of its body. Large, long feet leading to a pencil-thin ankle. The same situation went for its arms and hands. Its head was large, too large for its body, along with missing a bottom jaw. Its skin looked leathery and dry, almost like an elephant. What was left of the thing's mouth, wrapped around his head from end to end, being lined with what looked like at least 24 small, jagged, pointed teeth. Its eyes looked completely dead, closer to pure gray than pure white, as if they were filled with clouds of smoke. At first, all I could do was sit there with my light set on it, paralyzed with complete fear and confusion. I was almost unable to comprehend this thing had even been in front of me as I tried to process whatever the fuck I was staring at. However, my paralysis was quickly lifted as I heard the thing let out a high-pitched and gargly screech, before moving its way towards me in an unnatural manner. Its body moved like a living rag doll trying to run like a regular person, bending and contorting with each step towards me. My fear was briefly replaced with adrenaline as I lifted the gun and put 3 pellets in it before dashing for the ladder and locking the attic door. I quickly woke my brother up and told him we needed to get the fuck out, and there was no time to explain. I began Rolodexing through my head what I was going to say to him, And as we entered the truck and pulled out, sure enough, he asked me what was wrong. My brain landed on a huge gas leak in the kitchen. You didn't smell it on the way out? As I pretended to call the cops and report the situation. I mean, what was I gonna say? There's a goblin, monster thing in the attic. He looked at me before shrugging. Guess not. He responded as we drove back to our apartment. I couldn't tell you what the fuck it was I saw. I couldn't tell you why the fuck it would eat squirrel when it's able to break bottles and can seals. I couldn't tell you how it managed to use the TV. All I know for sure is it was much more intelligent than its appearance would lead you to believe. And I'm seriously starting to doubt my parents died of natural causes. After all, how likely is it a couple in their mid-50s die in their sleep on the exact same night? My husband tells me I've been muttering in my sleep ever since one of my twin boys passed away. He says my voice sounds almost identical to our teenage son's, but gnarled and raspy. To prove it to me, he took an audio recording last night. This is what I said on the recording. I know I should be thinking about my twin brother, cold and wet, being eaten from the inside out by bugs, wormy and flitting. Slimy, ferocious creatures with the sole instinct to pick everything clean off the bone. I know I should feel remorse over not focusing on the memories of his young life lived well, or the grief over him being hit by an 18-wheeler when he ran out on the highway. His long intestine unraveling, looking every bit like the average roadkill on a Sunday, and I should be perseverating on the immortality of humanity. The fact that cars continued to come, tears streaming down my mother's face with each one that whizzed by. And the car that didn't stop, the only evidence of its wrongdoing, a broken front mirror. The one thing that occupies every crevice of my crowded mind is the baseball. The feeling of it gracing my gloved palm at 4:42 p.m., October 9th, Astros versus Red Sox. When fate decided this pristine ball was going to be mine, the universe trusted I would take care of it, and take care of it I did. Every morning I would painstakingly wake up a full 60 minutes before school started to inspect it, dust it, apply a few drops of well water, buff it, tell it how it gave me purpose and reason to get up in the morning. Now that purpose is gone. My mother believed it'd be a good idea to stick the ball in with my brother's grave. He used to love throwing it around with you, she said. It's a good way for you to be with your brother. In reality, he always wanted that ball. He didn't care about the thing itself. No, he couldn't stand to see me win. His 16 attempts to steal the ball were all because he didn't catch it. I mean, the reason he was squashed like cream corn by that gigantic big rig is because I started cross country. He never wanted me to be faster than him. I've dealt with this my whole life. My mom did the dirty deed when I was at school. She knew how badly my brother wanted it, and whatever brother wants, brother gets. Tonight I will be having no trouble ripping it from his ice-cold appendages. You see, I loved that ball. For everything it is, not just a symbol of beating my brother, it's my most prized possession. And when drastic stakes hang in the balance, all options must be considered. I've considered mine. I look at the clock perched above the empty chalice of my once beloved property. It is mine and I will take it. I've already hidden the shovel beneath my bed. I reach under and inspect it now. Traces of blotted dirt remain from when I broke ground for Chloe or Australian Shepherd. This job will be no different. Light emanates from the moon, illuminating my path. My room is very orderly in the first place, ideal for situations such as these. No stumbling, rumbling, bumps in the night, absolutely no reason to arouse suspicion. I open my window and duck clean through the frame. I've had to get out many nights before, you see. I close my window to the last inch and jump the 4 feet to wet grass. Grave site's a mile away. I realize immediately I should have worn an extra layer under my windbreaker, but too late for that. I'm already 2 minutes later than originally scheduled, due in large part to the time reminiscing about the ball in its most pristine form. My greatest fear, I think, is that the baseball has become grubby. Not in an easy remedy sort of way, with general upkeep, a few drops of water, but in the most sinister way, in an irreversible way. So that this ball, the most precious thing in my life, with the chances of being mine ending up somewhere in the region of 0.00003%, would basically be rendered futile. Ugly, even. But I shake my head to get these dreadful, fanatical suspicions out of my mind and continue the trek. It's 4 a.m. Last drunken bums have left the vicinity, and eccentric jogger moms are still asleep. I am the lone human with what some may say most malicious intentions. But there is nothing but love in my heart for my brother. Sure, he always had to be better than me. Sure, my parents loved him more. Maybe I envied him. Maybe deep down I wanted to be like him. Isn't that the stuff of brotherhood? But he has no appreciation for the ball itself, and that is what must be set right. The chill picks up, and on this long dirt road, a straight line to my final destination. I realize the country takes on an entirely new feel at 4, different from 2:30 when I typically experience it. Quite a peaceful feeling indeed. I take solace in the fact that I am rescuing my dear friend. No heart, blood pumping through its veins, taking in oxygen, and yet the vibrational frequency still remains of love. How different is it from the love of my rotting corpse of a brother? Wind whistles through these craggly trees, whispering sweet nothings in my ear, encouraging me to go on, into the great unknown, and though I've tracked these dirt plains, forging this similar journey countless times over, light cascading from the moon makes this time feel different. Foreign. Illusory. I can see it now. Rubber center wrapped in yarn and covered with 2 strips of stunning white cowhide. Then suddenly I'm there. The blooming weeds surrounding the turf echo long-forgotten cries of the living. If only they knew the dead don't hear the cries. I walk over to the hill to the small, metal gate and am shocked to see a tall man, cloaked, staring down at my brother's freshly dug grave. His back faces me and his very presence sends a chill through my spine. I shudder, then duck, trying to become as small as possible. This stranger staring over a freshly dug grave at 4:23 in the a.m. is most likely not the church-going type. But what if he's here for my ball? Not on my watch, damn it. I remain crouched and slowly peek my head out from behind the gate, so that the only crown of my head is showing. I see this long, slender man with the black gloves reaching into his cloak and pull out a sharp metal shovel. As long and devious as he is, he starts slicing through the loose soil, chucking the excess dirt over his shoulder haphazardly. Shuck, thwack, shuck, thwack. My fists clench. Who does this man think he is? Digging up my brother. How could he dare? I look on, mouth agape as he continues his work. Hey, I shout, my voice echoing across the entire gravesite, reverberating off each headstone. I feel my face flush immediately, and the blood leaves my body, and my heart is in my throat, not daring to throb, every muscle on my skeleton seizing up tight. The hooded figure turns, staring at me. He drops his shovel, which clambers to the ground. I am terrified. He swiftly reaches his glove into his cloak and removes an object that looks strikingly familiar. My baseball. In pristine condition, practically glowing from the light cascading from the moon. It's never looked so perfect. Not a smudge, dot, speck. Nothing to indicate in any way it's been soiled. How did you? I start. The man places his right index finger to his lips. He then beckons me. He motions with his hand to walk towards him. I take a step forward. The man extends his hand with the baseball over the grave for my brother. No, I yelp. I take another step. The gloved hand turns over. All it needs to do is release its grip and the ball will be muddled. Please don't, I screech. Then with a flourish, the man opens his cloak and pulls out a boy. A dead boy. It's my brother. The man holds my brother effortlessly over the grave with one hand and the ball with the other. The man stares at me. Tears are streaming down my face. I'm a complete, total, utter fool. My brother. I blubber. I suck in all the mucus and liquid seeping out of me. I stand my ground. I want my brother. I scream. The man drops the baseball on the ground and removes his gloves. I gasp at his bony knuckles, completely stripped of flesh. He removes his hood and it's just a skeleton. It stares at me through its gaping eye sockets and places its long, bony index fingers on the temples of my brother's corpse. My brother takes a gulp of air and the tall skeleton disintegrates, leaving behind the black cloak and gloves in its wake. I stand there quaking in my boots. My brother stands up, brushing the dust off of him. He looks exactly as he did before he died. His sharp blue eyes meet mine. I hesitantly take a step forward and muster up the courage. Jack? I ask meekly. My brother grins, something wicked, and suddenly I feel a figure appear behind me. The skeleton hoists me up easily with its right hand, walking me towards the fresh dirt. It's holding the baseball in its other hand, whitewashed and immaculate. Keeping his smile, Jack points to the baseball with a single flick of the wrist. I manage to scream no before I'm sucked into the earth, and it all goes black. I hope he's whistling Sweet Dixie and grinning ear to ear on his way home. He and I both share the common belief. Truly, he did make the right choice. That is, a fine baseball. I'm now terrified at the way my living son stares at me with those cold, black eyes. I'm a sheep farmer from down under. Dingoes and wild dogs can be a real pest with livestock, so I'm no stranger to losing a few sheep here and there. However, if you don't deal with the problem quickly, you can lose up to a third of your flock in any given year. Recently, we've had a pretty bad spell of drought, and I've been highly motivated to make sure I don't lose any more money. The event took place about 2 weeks ago. I was rounding up livestock with the assistance of my beloved Australian shepherd, Cody. He's a beautiful purebred Kelpie that is mighty efficient when it comes to running operations on the farm. The sheep listen to him, and he need not bark twice to get them into line. The same chain of command existed between us. On this particular morning, I noticed some damage to the field's boundary fence. A large hole had been dug beneath the barbed wire, and traces of what looked like blood had dripped onto the dirt surface. This was a pretty good indicator that a dingo had snagged one of the little ones. A quick head count confirmed I was down on one of the lambs. I recall being slightly jarred by the dingo's movements. The dragging of an entire animal was extremely unusual and seemed like an unnecessary, arduous task. Typically, they would leave behind at least some remains. I justified this occurrence with dingoes being renowned for being merciless killers and strange in their motives. Sometimes they would kill a sheep for the fun of it. With this in mind, I excused the strange behavior as another one of the many abnormal characteristics of the pest. Naturally, I was quite furious about the incident. How is it that humans can be so high up the food chain and still find themselves being knocked down by a wild animal? I needed to reassert my territory. You can always use poison to eliminate the dingo threat, but there is no guarantee it would work, and I didn't want to risk Cody ingesting such a thing. I couldn't forgive myself for that. I was desiring a quick solution to the problem, and maybe an act of vengeance, so I decided to sit out on the farmhouse's porch that evening with my rifle. Growing up in rural Australia had gifted me with a very precise aim, hunting being a favored pastime of mine. If I missed, the sound of the bullet would at least let the dingo know this area wasn't theirs to prowl. The porch looked out over a 100-meter stretch of field that separated the farmhouse from the untamed bushland. The luscious green grass starkly contrasted the tangled shades of brown branches that swallowed the horizon. I assumed this is where our thief was coming from. I spent the afternoon carving out a double-pointed wooden stake. At 50 centimeters in length, the sharpened pole could be planted into the ground firmly with a chunk of meat attached to its top. I placed my lure onto the field soil, halfway between the farmhouse and the wilderness. The 100 meters had been transformed into a death strip. Twilight came and I settled into my seat. I held my rifle firmly in my right hand as I gazed towards the meat stick. Cody sat beside me, arguably more alert. Although he was an attentive dog, I had never seen him so focused. He stared at a point separating farmland from bush, never breaking his eye line, his ears pricked up to every sound nature spat out. They revolved around his head like tiny radar dishes. He whimpered. Usually when you live somewhere alone and isolated, you find yourself conversing with man's best friend. "You don't need to worry, Cody," I whispered, petting his black fur. "You're on the side of the better hunter." A branch snapped. Suddenly, Cody pounced onto all fours and began barking out into the field. I snapped my head back to the wooden pole and raised my rifle. The meat was gone. I scanned the farmlands but found no sign of whatever snatched the lure. It couldn't have been a dingo. That was too quick. Something would have had to run that stretch within a matter of seconds. My mind raced to what other possibilities could be plausible. There were no conclusions. How had it slipped away? Cody lost it. With each bark, I felt there was an ever-diminishing chance of catching the thing. The sheep had begun to race around their paddock, triggered by the familiar sounds of his yelps. I grabbed his collar and managed to get him seated. His paws danced nervously on the wooden panels as his eyeline remained locked. I could feel his tiny heart pumping in his chest. "Cody?" He didn't look away. This was bad. He always listened to me. "Cody." He quickly flashed me a look before turning back towards the strip. He saw it again. I knew he saw it because he erupted once more into a series of barks. I swirled and followed his line of sight. Something else was attached to the pole now. Something I hadn't put there. I couldn't make sense of the white blur at first until I saw its bloodied leg. The missing lamb. It was still alive. A makeshift rope of bark and vines had been tied around its neck, connecting it to the pole. It bleated out in pain and confusion. The most unsettling part of this visual was that it seemed the rope had been decorated with small daisies running along its length. Whatever had done this was far too fast to be human, far too intelligent to be any creature. As I was about to run out and reclaim my missing property, I observed the warning sign and stopped. Scrawled in the lamb's blood across its wool was a singular word: bait. I dared not fall for my own trick. It was mimicking my own tactics. I had never been taught how to hunt such a thing. It had become awfully quiet. It was dark now. Cody had finally stopped barking. Instead, he sat looking at me in a way he never had before, almost as if he was reevaluating me. Until that night, I didn't know dogs could do that. A piercing whistle cut through the cold air, emitting out of the bush. The sweat on my palms made the rifle slippery to grasp. Both Cody and myself looked out into the thicket and watched as a cloaked figure stepped out into the moonlight. The dark robes it wore looked like they were a part of its body, melded into its flesh. I was right. It wasn't human. The figure lifted a gray and scabby hand into the air. Raising the stolen chunk of meat, Cody glanced at me. Cody, no. He slowly began walking off the porch, gingerly placing each paw. The figure whistled once more, beckoning him. Cody, stay, I yelled. He didn't listen. Cody ran out across the grass, passing the lamb, and sprinted his way towards the thing. I aimed my rifle and hovered my finger over the trigger. I was ready to shoot. The hooded figure moved the meat in front of Cody's nose and weighed in. Cody sat down obediently. The meat dropped to the ground. Cody pounced and started to inhale it. The hooded figure leant down and began to slowly pet him. It was looking directly at me, white eyes staring into my soul with every stroke of my dog's fur. I couldn't believe it. I dropped my rifle. Cody had chosen the side of the better hunter. This happened to me at the beginning of 2021. I don't remember the exact date, but it was still winter. I was working at the time and my schedule was always 7 days of work and 5 of rest. Every break I would spend at my country house, which is a good 40 minutes walk away from the nearest town. I have never been so scared of being alone. I actually appreciate the quiet. Anyways, it was only me and my dog. It was windy and cold, and I had the fireplace running so the room was pretty warm. I usually keep the door open, just slightly because of the fire, but since it was so windy, I had it closed. Mind you, I had to lock it or it would stay open. And I only kept the window, that had bars, quiet like a prison cell, open just a little. I can swear on my life that the door was closed and I was warm and comfortable. So I kept almost falling asleep, only wanting to stay awake to finish the movie I was watching. Once the movie ended, at about 1 or 2 a.m., I kept procrastinating going to bed, because I would have to go outside and it was too cold. I fell asleep at some point and woke up to someone knocking at my door. To give you some context, everything around my country house is fenced, to the point where it's almost impossible to get in, much less at night, so I obviously thought it was a family member because they have keys, and since I locked the door, they couldn't open it from the outside. I looked at the clock and was able to read the numbers. I checked the TV and could read the subtitles. I know it wasn't a dream. I got up, opened the door, and found something. Someone that was definitely not a family member. There he stood. I always think of it as a male, an inhumanly tall and lanky. Arms and legs stretched to the point of looking like almost a wire. I couldn't even see his face. He was too tall for his frame to fit fully. He ducked and his face came into view, except there was no face, and no hair. Just a shape that somewhat resembled a head. He spoke, his tone gentle as that of a friend. That freaked me out even more. How did he speak without a mouth? May I come in? It's a ruthless night out there. I nodded, too scared to even have a fight or fly reaction. Moved away from the door to let him in. He graciously ducked inside, then stood, his full height, touching the ceiling with his hand. I tried not to show how scared I was, thinking it would be worse if he saw it, although my eyes did widen despite the best efforts. My dog, too tired after a day of running, playing, and jumping around, stayed asleep. I took that as a good sign. It would be going crazy if he was dangerous, right? The lanky man decided to sit down by the fire, in a very small chair, only used to stroke the fire since its legs were cut shorter than usual. It looked almost comical. The seat was directly in front of where I had been sitting. Too scared to accidentally offend him, I sat back there and simply watched TV while pretending I didn't feel him staring at me. He didn't talk at all. After a few hours, he raised from the seat, walked to the door, and patiently waited until I joined him. "Thank you for letting me warm myself," he said before ducking and leaving as if nothing had happened. I sat down, intending to not leave the room until the sun raised. I fell asleep at some point and woke up when my dog had a nightmare. He's really loud. The door was open, the key still hanging where I had last put them to lock the door. The door was open, but I swear I had closed it. To this day, I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't let him in. I still spend my days at my country house knowing, or hoping, that I will just need to be kind. This may be the last thing I ever write before I'm dead, or perhaps even something worse happens. My friend waits just outside my door waiting for my decision. He said he's going outside to enjoy himself and give me some time to think. "Take your time, Jason, but not too much. I'll only wait so long," he said in his now distorted voice. Why here, you ask? Because I don't think anywhere else would understand or care about the danger this poses. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. It started a few days ago. It was the last year of high school, and me and my friend Brian had checked out entirely. It was Friday afternoon, and we were walking home, which usually meant our usual route of going to the park, hanging out, and maybe getting a little stoned, then heading home. On our way to the park, we noticed a crowd had gathered. I went up to Jenna, a fellow classmate, and asked, "So what the hell is going on here?" "Oh hey Jason, it's super weird. This big fucking apple tree just kind of appeared out of nowhere last night. Don't you come through here to get to class?" "No, we just passed by here to enjoy the scenery as we go home. So what's the big deal? It's just an apple tree." I looked at Brian, and he looked a little pale. "Dude, you alright?" "Huh? Yeah. Don't know why an apple tree would weird me out." I was a bit stunned by that answer. You better be more worried about passing your finals than that fucking fruit, dude. I turned back to Jenna. "So again, why is there a crowd?" "Apart from a giant tree just popping up overnight." "Well, someone ate one and started tripping hard, talking about past lives and speaking different languages. The weirdest thing, though, it never seems to run out of fruit." "That all seems pretty fucking weird. Maybe I should try..." I was cut off by Brian. "Don't," he said. He looked like death. He was sweating profusely now and looked half ready to vomit. "Let's just go." I didn't say anything as we walked around the crowd and out of the park. "Damn, Brian, you look like you're about to pass out." "What?" Brian cut me off again. "It's wrong, Jason. It shouldn't be here. Not in this town. Not on this earth. Not in this universe. Promise me, whatever you do, don't eat one of those apples. Not a bite." "Brian, I think you're..." "Promise." Okay. I promise, I promise. Me and Brian were silent as we walked to his house. I didn't want him to walk home all by himself, plus my house was just a block away. As I was on my way home, I had a sudden urge to go back to that tree. There was still quite a crowd, though most had left by this point. I saw people gathering bunches of apples and leaving. I looked around and noticed nearby there was a nice juicy apple just laying in the grass. I stared at it for what felt like hours, remembering the promise I made, also the possibility of seeing what kind of person I had been in a past life. Without even realizing it, I was holding it in my hand. As if in a trance, I was slowly bringing it to my mouth. Just as I was about to take a bite, this feeling, like an inescapable dread or something akin to when you're just about to fall off the side of a cliff and time slows to let you ponder your last remaining seconds, hit me like a bullet. Suddenly, up was down, and the shade felt like it was brighter than the sun. I threw up as ice and acid hit my gut at once. Someone took notice because as I finally came to, I had a small crowd of my own. They asked me if I was okay, and I did my best to brush it off as a mild case of heat stroke. Someone gave me their water and I downed the whole thing. Some random person insisted on walking me home and, honestly, I felt in no position to refuse. I got home and was greeted by my mom, who at first was about to lecture me for being so late getting home, but then anger turned to sympathy as she saw my face. "Honey, you look white as a ghost. Are you okay?" She thanked the person who walked me home, and I explained that I just needed to rest and that it was just a bit of heat stroke. She made me drink about a gallon of water before she let me go to my room. I don't know how, but even then, I still felt dehydrated. Lying in my bed, I kept thinking about me and if my experience was the same as Brian's. Every time I thought about it, I got that feeling like I was going to throw up. Think of it like this. Have you ever felt like something was watching out of the corner of your eye? Except the more you tried to understand the feeling, the more you feel like something is watching you from behind your own eyes. I was so unnerved that I got no rest at all, and sleeping was basically out. I decided that if I couldn't sleep, then there was a good chance Brian couldn't either. I decided to call him and see if he was still up, and sure enough he was. "Hey Jason, what's up?" "Dude, I almost ate one." I felt just getting to the point was important. I think he was about to chastise me, but I cut him off. "I think the same thing you felt is what happened to me. Like everything in the world just turned wrong and my mind and body couldn't decide what reality was." None of us spoke for about a minute before Brian finally said, "It's evil. Pure and simple. Meet me there tonight. Bring a lighter." I tried to talk, but he hung up. I was going to call him to protest as I didn't want to be charged with arson just before graduation. But this gut feeling I had told me something worse was going to happen if we didn't remove that tree from this town. I met Brian at the entrance of the park. He had a backpack with him, and I showed him the lighter we used to light our joints. "Good," he said. "Let's hurry up and get this over with before anyone sees us." We got to the tree and I looked at my phone. It was 1 a.m. Brian must have seen me looking because he said, "Thank God it's Friday, right?" We both laughed. He took out a small canister that smelled of gasoline and poured it on the tree. I approached it carefully and lit the tree with one hand out while protecting my face with the other. It lit up quickly and we ran like hell. We weren't going to stay and risk getting caught. I think I didn't wake up till almost 1. I looked at my phone and holy shit was Brian blowing it up. I called him, but before I even had a chance to speak. "Where are you? Are you okay?" Yeah, what's..." "It didn't work. It didn't fucking work." I remember how frightened he sounded, like the end was just around the corner. It got bigger. The fire made it fucking bigger. Now some local company is trying to take ownership of it. Check the local news. I turned on my TV to see our local news lady talking to some woman from a food company located in our little town. Yes, we believe this tree is a miracle of God. We want to share this miracle with the whole world. To see one's past lives could teach us so much about human history and help us not to repeat our past mistakes. I dropped my phone. How could this have happened? Doesn't wood burn? It took me a second to realize that Brian wasn't talking to me. Dude. I came out of my trance and picked up my phone. Now what? I asked. There's a forum. People in the town like us who know that shit is evil. We're ending it tonight. I could only imagine what he meant. Are you in? Something about this felt wrong for some reason. Are you in? I don't know. I mean, the last time we thought we were doing the right thing, it just made it worse. Brian gave a ch and hung up. Don't get me wrong. I knew the danger this tree posed, or at least my gut did. I honestly wished at the time I had gone. Maybe I wouldn't be in the predicament I am now. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking I should be there with him. We always had each other's back, so why was I hesitant now? Suddenly, as if a switch were flipped, my brain turned inside out again, and that inescapable dread was back. I ripped open the door, ran outside while picking up the car keys, and got in the car. My parents ran at the car with my dad asking what the hell was wrong with me. All I could do was yell out the word apples and put the car in reverse. I think I ran more than a few reds as I was fairly sure a cop was chasing me. I finally made it to where this food processing plant was, and it seemed like no one was there. The cop pulled up behind me as I parked and had his hand on his gun. As he was approaching my car, a large explosion followed by a sonic boom launched out of the building. The windows on the car shattered, and I was lucky I didn't lose an eye. I looked out towards the building, and there were a large number of people coming out of the explosion. One was Brian. He looked like he was dead on his feet. I called out to him, and he gave a slight smile as he collapsed. I ran and checked his pulse. Still alive. I picked him up and put him in the car. My house, he said in a hoarse whisper. Dude, we gotta get you to the hospital. It looks like that explosion knocked out that officer, so let's just get you some help. My house, he said a bit more forcefully. I hit the steering wheel. Fuck. I put it in drive and took him to his place. His parents were shocked to see their baby boy looking like death warmed over. We have to call an ambulance. His dad's son. His mom called 911 and was explaining the situation. Brian was trying to get up, but his dad was trying to get him to stay laying down. Gonna puke, was all Brian could say before he pushed his dad away with enough force to send him flying across the room. Oh my god, and holy shit, was all me and Brian's mom could spit out before Brian started vomiting up what looked like applesauce. Whatever happened at that processing plant, copious amounts of those apples somehow found their way into my best friend's stomach. Some guy came with explosives. He was planning on killing anyone inside. I tried to warn anyone inside, but got knocked. He threw up again. Woke up inside. Was on a catwalk. Tried to get up. Pushed into a vat. Couldn't hold my breath. His scream was louder than anything I'd ever heard from him. His mom was in tears, but was too afraid to approach him. Then something terrifying happened. His body began to change. His limbs elongated and his mouth began to grow rows of sharpened teeth. His skin became so black that it seemed to absorb light. It took me a second to realize that the room had gone completely dark. Oh my god, Brian's mom yelled. What used to be Brian stood up, though not completely, as his new frame was taller than the ceiling. I heard a scream come from outside and instinctively turned my head. By the time I looked back, I saw the back of Brian as he chased after his mom, who had tried to escape this house and maybe, like me, hoping to escape this reality. I just stood there for what felt like hours. I finally snapped out of it when I heard Brian's mom screech in a way that it is best not described. I'm not ashamed to say I pissed myself. I inched toward the front door slowly and put my back against the wall next to it. I slowly looked out to see something that, if I hadn't already emptied my bladder, would have. Not just a scream, but screams, echoing out into the night as several grotesque forms of all shapes and sizes were chasing after the panicked populace. Brian and a few others were deep in concentration as they feasted on what was a growing pile of corpses. I ran for it. A stupid move, I know, but reason had left me, and I'll be damned if I wasn't going to see if my parents were okay. I saw something beyond nightmares. Not one shred of our little town seemed to be safe. I heard a scream and again couldn't help but look. I'd been seen. I thought I was done for, but a corpse flew through the air and this thing with wings crumpled to the ground. I looked and Brian had his eyes, or what was a distinct absence of light and where his eyes should be, on me. I started running again. I made it home. It was empty and trashed. I heard some noise from the back, and dread had seized me again. Out of the back door I saw one of those things. It was gnawing on some bones. Only a scrap of skin still clinging on my mom's skull told me what I didn't want to know. Jason. I heard the distorted voice of Brian say, "If it's any consolation, I am truly sorry. I guess after so long being repressed, we needed to eat." I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to scream or cry or beg or any of it. I just went into a rage. I picked up the biggest piece of debris and swung. It hit Brian square in the jaw. He just knelt down further. I took the debris from my hands and pulled me into a hug. Dread like that when I almost ate the apple. I pushed him away and ran into my room. I'm not even sure if I escaped on my own or if he let me go. A second later I heard him again. "Jason, I need to tell you why. Why what's happening is so important and so amazing." He explained how demons were the core of millions of souls, that their master had them seek forgiveness and be allowed to atone by living righteous lives through constant reincarnation. Their true task was to weaken humanity. They would have no idea why they do the things they do, but forming the basis of our current world apathy. Then when the tree comes, one their lord grew, to eat of it and remember their mission, then leave to make ready the invasion. "I'm not going to let you be killed, Jason, but I will give you a choice." He slid half an apple under my door. "Join us willingly, or I bust down the door and you join us unwillingly. I'll give you some time." I finally understood. At my core, I was a demon. It didn't matter how good or loving I was always moving toward this goal without even knowing. Now, we've come full circle. I've thought about ending things on my own terms, but why bother? I'm sure no matter what life I reincarnated into, he'd find me. He is my best friend after all. I purposefully kept the name and location of this place a secret. I don't know how much of this place will even be around after tonight or if anyone will be left. But for your own good, don't come looking. All I'll say is this too. If an apple tree happens to appear in your town out of nowhere, run fast, run far, and for the love of God, don't let anyone eat the apples. Goodbye. I dreaded going to get groceries, but I had to at least once a month. I observed the outside from my window. It looked cold. some clouds, but precipitation seemed unlikely. More importantly, there was no one to be seen. I'll wear a coat, but unfortunately no hood. It's unnecessary today and would just draw attention. I dressed up and retrieved my wallet, cell phone, keys, and pocket knife. I unlocked each lock on my apartment door and left, carefully relocking them behind me. These damned stairs. It took me a long time to plot it out, but I'd finally perfected my route down them. Left, middle, left, right, right, left, right, left, skip to center, left. They creaked away, but I avoided the really bad spots. I cracked the lobby door open and peeked through. There were several people walking along now. 2 across the street and 1 on my side. Cars ambled by. I closed the door, waited a minute, opened it, and stepped outside. I couldn't peek twice. All but one of the people had moved on. A man in a gray overcoat. He was now standing a little bit down the block, leaning up against a chain-link fence. He must be watching me. I steadied myself and descended the stone stairs with mock confidence. Turned sharply left and began walking. I reached the end of the block and had to wait for the walk sign. Ugh. At least it would be acceptable to look around, and I did. I pretended to check my pockets and turned around to look back at the man. He was still leaning against the fence, not looking at me. Better. I turned back around to see that the light had changed. Shit. How long had it been that way? Just a second? 2 or 3? If it was more than 3, I'd look suspicious. But at least I had the excuse that I was checking my pockets. Always prepare an excuse. I hastily crossed the street, exaggerating, looking both ways in order to take in my surroundings. 2 cars were lined up to cross the intersection toward me. Their drivers seemed to pay me no mind. One was looking down at his phone, and the other seemed to be bobbing his head. Do any of them pay attention while driving? I glanced over my shoulder again once across the street to check on the man in the coat. He was still there. He was at the edge of my vision now, so I can't be sure. But I think he was looking in my direction. I shuddered and walked a little faster. The rest of the way was about as smooth as it could be. I only had to stop for one more light, and no one spared me a glance. Not bad. Now I had to actually go through the store. I went in and grabbed a basket, looking down to avoid the camera. The first aisle was junk food, so I grabbed a pack of cookies. I went around to the refrigerators in the back and took a half-gallon of one of the mini types of milk. Down the next aisle, a box of macaroni and some sauce. Next, a box of something or other. The shopper's eyes bore into me, and I was quickly running out of patience for choosing things carefully. I just wanted to go home. I hurried down the remaining aisles, grabbing a few more increasingly random things and some fruits and vegetables. I finally made my way to the registers and unloaded onto the conveyor. Of course, someone immediately got in line behind me. That always seems to happen. I could feel sweat prickling my neck and back. She scanned the items, one after another. It seemed to take an eternity for the cashier to scan and bag everything, and I'm pretty sure she shot me a few strange looks. It's fine, though. She was too busy for me to stick in her mind. I paid with my card and hustled out of the store, heart racing from the stressful situation. I walked around to the back of the building and took a moment to lean up against the store wall and breathe the cool afternoon air. Peace and quiet in this empty alleyway, away from prying eyes. After I had regained my composure, I carefully checked around the corner, and with no one entering or exiting the store, I walked to the front with my purchases and turned left to head home. Just before turning, however, I spotted something that made my eyes dilate with worry. I couldn't be certain it was him with the quick glance I stole, but it certainly seemed likely. The man in the gray overcoat. I stiffly turned my head as ice shot through my veins, and my mind raced with fear. I started walking, steps quick and sharp toward my home. I got into a rhythm and felt that I was making good progress, and I didn't need to stop for the first light. The second one stopped me, though, and I found myself short of breath. The skin on my back still crawled, and I almost didn't have control of myself as I turned ahead to look back. I knew I was breaking the rule. I didn't have an excuse, but I needed to know. There he was, heading my way, moving at a steady, deliberate pace. He was looking right at me. Shit. I turned around and, seeing that no cars were coming, brazenly defied the walk sign. I pushed my feet forward and pulled my body along with all my strength. I already had his attention. I didn't want to draw that of any others. A fiery determination welled up inside of me, pushing down the fears telling me to start running. I took long strides and was so keenly aware of my surroundings that I felt like I had eyes all over my head. I was certainly going to be all right. I am better than him. I quickly came to the last intersection with its angry red light. I stopped and decided to check behind me once again, and in an instant my temporary confidence was shattered. There were 3 men now, walking unnaturally fast in an arrowhead-like formation. They were about half a block away. My eyes shot wide open in terror as I broke into a run. A car horn blared right next to me, and I heard squealing tires, but I didn't care. I ran for my life. I reached my door and slammed my key in the lock, turned it and tore it open, shutting it tight behind me. Through the small window in the front door, I saw 7 or 8 of them, all dressed in long, dark coats and concealing hats, standing like racked pool balls, looking right at me. I backed away from the door and ran back up the steps, unlocked my apartment and went in, sealing it up tight behind me. I dropped a bag of groceries in the trash and shed my clothes down my pristine, unblemished skin. I walked to my sparsely populated bookshelf and pulled it aside, once again laying eyes on my steely pod. I walked in and hit the button on the wall, the semicircular door sliding shut behind me. The lights came on one by one, illuminating the various control panels and pilot seat. I pulled in my knees, reversing the direction of the bend in my legs, cracked my neck to the left and right, allowing it to elongate. I stretched backward, allowing my spine to revert to the proper shape and my second pair of arms to emerge from my chest plate. I made sure to unfold them slowly and give the phalanges a minute to unfurl. I stretched and moved all of my various appendages around. It's been a while and I don't want to pull a muscle. I couldn't allow myself to bask in the freedom of my true form, though. I took my place in the seat and started flipping switches and pulling levers. The small room changed around me and whirred to life, but in a moment I'd be able to go. Time to relocate.